The palm trees of Brentwood usually stand as silent sentinels of the American dream. In this exclusive enclave of Los Angeles, the air in December 2025 was thick with the scent of pine and the glow of million-dollar holiday displays. For Hollywood royalty like Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, this was a season of warmth and tradition. As the first night of Hanukkah approached, the Reiner estate was a beacon of festive cheer, with its gates often left open to welcome friends and family into a world of creativity and kindness. But on the afternoon of December 14th, that dream dissolved into a waking nightmare. By 3:40 p.m., a 911 call reported a scene of unimaginable carnage. Rob and Michelle Reiner, pillars of the entertainment industry, were found dead inside their home, victims of a brutal stabbing. The shockwaves traveled instantly from the hills of LA to the far reaches of the globe. How could a man who spent his life making us laugh and believe in love meet such a violent end? The answer, as police would soon allege, lay within his own bloodline. This was not a random act of suburban violence. It was the final, tragic explosion of a decades-long struggle between a legendary father and a son lost to the shadows of mental illness and addiction. Today, we pull back the curtain on the final hours of the Reiner dynasty, exploring the red flags at a high society party, the tactical silence of the LAPD, and the heartbreaking journey of a family that tried everything to save a son who would eventually become their undoing. The tranquility of Sunday afternoon was shattered by a discovery so graphic it left veteran first responders reeling. Romy Reiner, the couple's daughter who lived just across the street, had walked into her parents' home expecting to begin the Hanukkah celebrations. Instead, she found her parents' lifeless bodies. Sources indicate the scene was animalistic, with the victims having their throats slit in a manner that suggested a terrifying level of personal rage. Romy immediately pointed toward her brother, Nick Reiner, as the only person capable of such an atrocity. However, as the media swarmed the Brentwood perimeter, the initial police response was shrouded in a confusing, frustrating silence. During the first press conference, LAPD officials refused to even call the incident a homicide, claiming they had not yet searched the house. This sparked a frenzy of rumors. Was there a cover-up? Was the killer still at large? The truth was far more tactical. Because Nick Reiner was a legal resident of the home, California law required an additional, specific warrant to search the premises for a criminal investigation. The police were playing a high-stakes game of chess. They knew Nick was likely inside or nearby, and they did not want to alert him that he was already their primary suspect. By feigning uncertainty, they secured the perimeter while waiting for a judge to sign the warrants that would make their evidence bulletproof in court. They watched the house, monitored every exit, and waited. It was a best practice approach, designed to ensure that when the handcuffs finally clicked, no technicality could ever set the suspect free. To understand the why behind this tragedy, investigators had to look back just 24 hours to a star-studded Christmas party at the home of late-night host Conan O'Brien. It was here that the cracks in the Reiner family's facade finally split wide open in front of Hollywood's elite. Witnesses describe an evening where the festive atmosphere was punctuated by a palpable sense of dread whenever Nick Reiner was in the room. While guests were dressed in elegant holiday attire, Nick arrived in a drab hoodie, his eyes described as vacant and off. The tension reached a breaking point when a loud and ugly argument erupted between Rob Reiner and his son. In a room filled with their peers, the legendary director was seen desperately trying to manage a son who seemed increasingly detached from reality. This wasn't a typical family spat. It was a visible manifestation of a father's exhaustion and a son's growing instability. Reports suggest that other celebrities were so disturbed by the confrontation that it became the talk of the party. That ride home on Saturday night must have been a descent into silence or a continuation of the hostilities. For Rob and Michelle, it was another night of managing the unmanageable. For Nick, it may have been the moment his internal delusions turned toward a permanent, violent solution. The party at Conan's was the final warning sign, a public cry for help that went unanswered before the sun rose on a day that would end in the ultimate betrayal. The news of the Rainers' deaths didn't just break the hearts of fans, it decimated a tight-knit circle of legends who viewed Rob and Michelle as the heart and soul of the industry. As the crime scene tape went up, the first people to arrive weren't just reporters, but lifelong friends like Billy Crystal, Larry David, and Albert Brooks. Billy Crystal and his wife Janice were reportedly among the first to see the horrific aftermath, arriving in a flash after a frantic call from Rob Reiner. The sight of these titans of comedy standing on a Brentwood sidewalk in tears was a testament to the vacuum left by the Reiners' passing. This was a community that had celebrated every milestone together, from the heights of When Harry Met Sally to their decades of social activism. The neighbors, too, felt the weight of the loss, describing the couple as vibrant and well-liked, people who never let fame harden their hearts to the people around them. The mourning was national. Tributes poured in highlighting Rob's work for early childhood education and Michelle's dedication to her family. But beneath the tributes was a shared, horrifying realization. This was a family that had been suffering in private for years. The industry wasn't just grieving a director and his wife. They were grieving the failure of love to save a family from the most intimate form of destruction. Nick Reiner's path to that Sunday afternoon was paved with years of documented pain and professional intervention. His struggle with substance abuse and mental health began when he was just 15 years old, the same age he entered his first rehab facility. Over the next 17 years, the cycle of addiction and recovery became the defining rhythm of his life. He wasn't just a troubled kid. He was a man lost in a labyrinth of psychosis and drug dependency that saw him living as a homeless teenager across Maine, New Jersey, and Texas. Rob Reiner did not hide from his son's demons. In an act of radical transparency, he and Nick co-wrote the film Being Charlie, which Rob directed. The movie was a raw, semi-autobiographical look at their mutual struggle to find common ground amidst Nick's addiction. It was meant to be a bridge, a way for art to heal the wounds that reality kept reopening. But even the power of cinema couldn't fix the chemical imbalances in Nick's brain. Family, friends, and neighbors revealed that Nick suffered from what many believe to be schizophrenia. The pattern was agonizingly familiar. Nick would start his medication, begin to feel normal, and then decide he no longer needed the drugs. Every time he went off his meds, the psychosis returned with a vengeance. The Rainers were living in a constant state of exigency, never knowing if the son they were trying to help was the same son who would eventually turn a blade against them. The forensic reality of what occurred inside the Reiner residence is a subject that legal experts and criminal psychologists will likely study for years to come, because of the sheer level of intimate brutality involved. When the Los Angeles Police Department and the coroner's office finally began their meticulous search of the home following the acquisition of the necessary warrants, they were met with a crime scene that suggested an explosion of unchecked rage. The official reports indicate that both Rob and Michelle Reiner suffered catastrophic injuries, specifically that their throats had been slit and they had been stabbed multiple times. In the world of criminal profiling, this type of overkill is often associated with a suspect who has a deep, albeit distorted, emotional connection to the victims. It isn't just about ending a life. It is an act of total erasure. The physical evidence suggested an almost animalistic encounter. Retired FBI agents who analyzed the scene noted that in a typical confrontation involving multiple targets, an assailant will almost instinctively go after the alpha figure first to neutralize the biggest threat. In this case, that was Rob Reiner. At 6 feet tall and with a commanding presence, Rob was a formidable figure. But the suddenness and ferocity of the attack likely left him with little room to defend himself. Investigators looked closely for defensive wounds on Rob's hands and arms, which would indicate a struggle. But the nature of the injuries suggested he was caught completely off guard, perhaps while seated or in a state of relaxation within his own sanctuary. Michelle, witnesses believe, likely tried to intervene or happened upon the scene, only to become the next target of her son's inexplicable frenzy. The sheer volume of forensic evidence was staggering. Because the attack involved a knife, investigators were tasked with conducting large samplings of blood from throughout the residence. In violent knife struggles, it is extremely common for the assailant to inadvertently cut their own hands as the weapon becomes slick, meaning the DNA of the killer is often mingled with that of the victims. Forensic teams spent over 24 hours swabbing surfaces and collecting biological data to ensure that the link between Nick Reiner and the murders was scientifically undeniable. This meticulous approach was part of the LAPD's best practice strategy, ensuring that even in a case of this magnitude, the evidence would be secure and unchallengeable in a court of law. Central to the investigation is the psychological state of Nick Reiner at the time of the killings. Those close to the family have long whispered about the severity of Nick's mental health struggles, which went far beyond simple rebellion or typical addiction. Friends of the family described a history of deep psychosis and schizophrenia, a condition that required constant medication and professional monitoring. The tragedy of schizophrenia is often the cycle of wellness, where a patient begins to feel better, believes they no longer need their medication, and then spirals back into a world of delusions and hallucinations. It is widely believed by those in the Brentwood community that Nick had recently stopped his treatment, leading to a state of paranoia that may have reached its breaking point on that first night of Hanukkah. Neighbors recalled a persistent sense of unease regarding Nick's presence in the house. While the Reiners were vibrant, social people who frequently kept their gates open for holiday celebrations, the son was a shadow in the background. He was often described as uncommunicative, wearing hoodies even in warm weather, and possessing a 1,000-yard stare that made those around him uncomfortable. This behavior was reportedly on full display just 24 hours before the murders at Conan O'Brien's party, where Nick's inability to fit into the social fabric of the evening was a glaring red flag that everyone saw, but no one could truly intervene in. Following his arrest near the USC campus, Nick Reiner was transported to the Twin Towers Correctional Facility, a location known for housing inmates with severe mental health needs. Almost immediately, he was placed on suicide watch, a standard procedure for high-profile suspects in such grisly cases, especially those with a documented history of instability. His bond, which was initially discussed at $4 million, was effectively revoked, leaving him with zero bond and no chance of release as he awaits trial. He is currently being held in a state of isolation, monitored around the clock to prevent him from harming himself before he can face the justice system. The legal battle ahead will almost certainly center on a plea of insanity. Given Nick's decades-long history of being in and out of rehab facilities and psychiatric wards, his defense team will likely argue that he was not in control of his faculties and did not understand the nature of his actions. However, legal experts point out that in California, a history of choosing to go off medication while knowing one has violent tendencies can actually work against a defendant. If the prosecution can prove that Nick was aware of the risks of stopping his treatment, they may argue that he bears full criminal responsibility for the tragedy that followed. As the community of Brentwood remains shaken and the world of Hollywood continues to mourn, the focus remains on the why. How does a child who was given every opportunity, every ounce of support, and a father who literally made a film to try and bridge the gap between them end up committing such an atrocity? The answer lies in the dark intersection of severe mental illness and a family's desperate, perhaps even dangerous hope that their love would eventually be enough to heal the unhealable. The legacy of Rob Reiner is one that was defined by laughter, deep social conviction, and a profound love for the art of storytelling. Along with his wife Michelle, he spent decades building a life that was as much about giving back as it was about the bright lights of Hollywood. To see that life extinguished in such a violent, intimate manner is a tragedy that defies easy explanation. It serves as a haunting reminder that behind the massive gates of Brentwood's most beautiful estates, there are often battles being fought that no amount of fame or fortune can truly win. For years, Rob and Michelle lived in a state of constant, quiet vigilance, trying to balance their public roles with the private agony of a son who was spiraling further out of reach. They didn't just provide financial support, they provided emotional sanctuary, even when that sanctuary was met with hostility and silence. The fact that they were killed on the first night of Hanukkah, a time meant for light and dedication, adds a layer of symbolic cruelty to a story that was already overflowing with pain. As the legal proceedings against Nick Reiner move forward, the conversation will inevitably shift toward the systemic failures of mental health care and the limits of parental intervention. We are left to wonder if there was ever a version of this story that didn't end in blood, or if the tragedy was set in motion long ago when the first signs of psychosis began to appear in a 15-year-old boy. The Reiner family's struggle was one of the most documented in Hollywood, yet it still ended in a way that no one, not even those closest to them, could have fully anticipated. We want to hear from you on this devastating case. Does the long history of Nick Reiner's mental illness change how you view the culpability of his actions? Or is the brutality of the crime something that can never be excused? How can families better protect themselves when a loved one becomes a potential threat? Share your thoughts in the comments below as we continue to monitor the upcoming court hearings and forensic updates. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive on Starlight Remains. This has been a difficult chapter to cover, but it is one that reminds us of the human complexity behind the celebrities we admire. If you found this investigation insightful, please make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on the stories that shape our world. We will be back with more coverage as this case unfolds in the Los Angeles court system. Stay safe, and we will see you in the next video.